everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to today's webinar, um, Applying Emotional Intelligence Daily by Adam Schmidt from our Build Your Career webinar series. My name is Scott Levine, and I'm the membership manager here at the IEEE Computer Society. Each month, we host a webinar on vital business skills that will help you excel at your current job and be helpful throughout your career. Topics covered will include communication skills, verbal and written, body language, interviewing tips, confidence building, to name a few. Before we get started, I would like to address some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email tomorrow, which will include a copy of the slides and the recording. You can ask any questions in the Q&A box you see on your screen. And if possible, please reference the slide your question refers to. Adam will answer as many questions as he can following the presentation. Creating a healthy work environment for you and your coworkers first starts with emotional intelligence. In addition to this webinar on EQ, you can continue to build your soft skills with the revamped IEEE Computer Society Career Center. Check out and access job postings, resume guidance, career advice, and for all stages in your career. More information will be shared after the webinar, and you can always learn more at computer.org. Circling back to today's topic, emotional intelligence refers to the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions as well as the emotions of others. It is a crucial aspect of interpersonal relationships, leadership, and personal development. Beyond the textbook definitions, this webinar will focus on putting EQ to work to improve your relationships, communication, improve your decision-making, leadership skills, and your self-awareness. As mentioned, joining us today is Adam Schmidt, a professional facilitator, trainer, and leadership coach with 20 years of leadership and consulting experience. Throughout his career, people development has been a passion for Adam. He has an exceptional ability to guide others to overcome real and perceived obstacles. Adam's an International Coaching Federation Master Certified Coach. His coaching style is shaped by powerful questioning, authentic listening, accountability, and being fully present for his clients. His capability to translate his clients' diverse work and personal experience into tangible resources for personal and professional growth allows him to succeed with individuals from various backgrounds and professions. Adam, thank you for joining us again, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's great to be back with IEEE and talking today about the daily practical application of emotional intelligence. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about emotional intelligence itself, just a reminder of what it is and how it shows up in our lives, and then think about what are some of the things that we can do on a day-to-day basis that actually manifest our emotional intelligence, that bring it to bear in a way that we experience it ourselves and better ourselves, and the ways that others around us can experience it so that they feel embraced by us, that they feel connected to us, that they feel like we can be trusted emotionally and behaviorally in a way that says, you can come to me with challenges. I can understand where you're coming from. Words like sympathy, empathy, and understanding are the words that we want to associate with today's learning around emotional intelligence. You'll see the way I've structured our discussion today is not around here's a list of the 50 things you can do to be more emotionally intelligent, but rather we'll look at each aspect, of which there are 4 of emotional intelligence, and think about the things that we can do that are pretty easy, kind of no problem. Let's see if we can integrate that day to day. Just a little reminder might help. And then something that might be a little more complicated, something that takes a little more effort, and then what we might call sort of the advanced level of that skill, something that would really be a dedicated practice or dedicated behavior that you'd want to introduce to fully maximize that area of your emotional intelligence. So for each domain that we go through, we're going to have kind of the 3 bears, The little bear, that's easy to do all the time, no big deal. The middle bear, that might take a little bit more effort, but still very manageable. And then finally, what would it look like to really integrate this more advanced skill on a day-to-day basis? You might reflect as we go through this presentation on what are some of these things that I do naturally anyway? What are some of the areas that, well, Adam, you're telling me to do this, but that's part of who I am. That's wonderful. It's great that you're already there. See if you can think about what would be next for me. Also assess yourself, a little bit of kind of self-reflection and assessment today, and a part of emotional intelligence is to notice what is the area that feels most distant to you. Which domain of emotional intelligence feels the furthest away? Like, yeah, I kind of know how I feel, and I feel like I manage my emotions pretty well, but when I'm with other people, I just often don't feel connected to them or have difficulty understanding their position or their emotions. What is it? Which area feels the most foreign to you that you might be able to introduce a little something? My hope is that by the end of today's conversation, you have just a couple takeaways, things that you can say. I attended this webinar yesterday. It was only about 45 minutes long, and I took away just one or two things that are helping me move forward. Our job today is not to fix you or to change you in any way. It's to say, I wonder if there's just a little tiny behavior I could introduce to maximize my emotional intelligence to a greater extent. So with that in mind, let's step into just a few slides here and thinking about our topics for today's discussion. As I mentioned, we'll talk about an understanding of why EQ is important and recommendations for further learning. Especially at the end of today's conversation, I'll talk a little bit about an assessment that's very inexpensive that you can take that'll help you kind of gauge where you are in the 4 different domains of emotional intelligence. And of course, as I mentioned, some strategies for increasing our EQ in each of the 4 domains. And I want to hone in for a second on this word increasing, strategies for increasing our EQ. We could also use the word develop or grow our EQ in each of those 4 domains. This isn't about saying, well, I only have this much emotional intelligence and that's all I can do. Emotional intelligence is a skill that we can grow. It is something that we can get better at. And that is a distinction between what we call EQ and IQ, that emotional intelligence versus our intellectual intelligence. We know from our academic experiences and appreciating our strengths and weaknesses in the academic area that we might have some limitations. I know I'm not a wonderful reader, for example. My reading comprehension is fair. It's why I like to put great pictures on my slides. Images help me explain what's going on. My sweet spot is communicating as I am now with you versus, say, writing a book about what we're about to talk about. I know that I have kind of an upper academic limit, an upper intellectual intelligence limit there. The difference with EQ is that it can be learned. It can be something we practice and get better at and make us better leaders, better peers, better subordinates to our colleagues, both professional and personal. So those are some of the topics for today's discussion. Let's review for a second what is emotional intelligence. I spoke a little bit about EQ versus IQ there, but EQ really focuses on this idea of being aware of, managing, and expressing our emotions. And notice kind of the arc there that I mentioned. Am I aware of my emotions? Can I manage them and then express them in a healthy way? This is emotional intelligence, this full life cycle of being aware of them, I manage them, and I express them with those around me. Our emotional intelligence drives our behavior and our impact on people. One of the things we'll spend a little bit of time talking about today is called the thinking path. The thinking path is something I've mentioned in our webinars before, but if you've attended those, you might recall it. I'll mention it here again. The thinking path is 4 steps, and it goes think, feel, act, result. This is the path that our brain takes billions of times a day to help us make decisions. I think something, maybe I'm hungry. I feel, yes, my stomach says I'm hungry. I take an action, I have a sandwich. The result is I'm full. That's a very simple example of what our brain does millions and millions, if not billions of times a day to help us make decisions. Think, feel, act, result. Unfortunately, our brains are very, very efficient and they can accelerate us just too quickly through that process sometimes. I think my colleague did something. Um, I feel angry and frustrated and I act too quickly. I lash out and say, you shouldn't have done that, or you're cheating me again, or you've cut in line again, whatever it might be. I have a 5-year-old, so I'm thinking about things like cutting in the lunch line or cutting to use the slide that are very upsetting. And what we want to do in emotional intelligence is see if we can create a little bit of space between that feel and that act. A little bit of space. If I think something, I feel something, can I create some space before I act to be a better leader, to be a better peer, to be a better colleague, both personally and professionally? So everything we do today is committed to this idea of creating space between how I feel and the action I'm going to take based off of that feeling. If I think I've been cheated, I feel angry, and I act by lashing out, I've lost my emotional intelligence bearing, right? We went too quickly down that express lane in our brains to react that way. What we want to do is, I think I feel angry. I feel angry for sure. And now I need to process that. As an emotionally intelligent person, I take a moment to say, why am I angry? What does this anger feel like? What is the real root cause of this anger? And can I make a good decision that I'll be proud of in the long term about what to do next? What action can I take to say, you know what, let me relax here. Let me take a breath. Let me create some space, go for a walk around my house. It's the same reason we tell our young children, as I tell mine, if you feel angry, take a moment and count to 10. At least create that much space. I remember very clearly in the 7th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Ober, and Mrs. Ober would always tell her students to count to 10 if they felt angry. And of course, we didn't know it at the time. We were young grade school students, but what she was doing was trying to introduce a gap, introduce some space between, I think this happened, I feel this way, but before I act, I'm going to cool off for a second and process what's happening. More on the thinking path in a little bit. And of course, a leader that exercises emotional intelligence has good judgment and common sense. Good judgment comes from creating that space. Because how do we lose our good judgment, right? Our good judgment is lost when we are, and I'll use a term from Dan Goldman, who's the sort of founding father of this idea of emotional intelligence from the mid-1990s, we are emotionally hijacked. We are not being rational in our decisions. I bet all of us on this webinar today can reflect on a time when we're not necessarily proud of how we reacted to a given situation. Maybe it was with one of our kids, maybe it was with a peer, maybe it was with our boss. And we look back and we say, man, I wish I had behaved a little bit differently. We might use that today as you think through some of the techniques that we'll offer to think, if I had done this, what might have I done? If I had done this, would I have exercised better judgment? Was I emotionally hijacked in that moment? Notice what we're talking about so far is not changing our emotions. We're not saying to feel angry is wrong. We're not saying that if I feel angry, frustrated, if I feel elated and happy, that that's wrong. Our feelings are real and true to us and should be honored. The idea is to separate that feeling from an action that we wouldn't be proud of in the long term. Again, creating space between feel and act. So that's where our focus is today, on emotional intelligence. A quick review of the 4 domains of EQ. Notice on the left-hand side here, we've got the axes of who I am and what I do. And then on the bottom axes, we have managing self and managing others. So we can kind of dial in onto the different quadrants we're discussing here. We'll start in the upper left with self-awareness, who I am, and managing self, right? Do I know who I am emotionally? Can I see the effects of my reaction on others? And can I acknowledge my strengths and limitations? How well do I know myself? As I look to the upper right, it's the intersection of who I am and managing others. Can I employ tools to counteract abrogation? Am I harnessing my intuition and creativity? Am I maintaining my resiliency in the face of pressure? How do I manage myself? How do I know how to manage myself in that space? A distinction between awareness I understand what's happening, and management, I can do something about what's happening. What I do, my relationship skills, can I de-escalate conflict? Can I inspire and influence others? And can I work collaboratively in teams? At the intersection of what I do in managing others lies our awareness of others in the lower right now, tuning into where others are, showing empathy by sensing others, and reading organizational currents accurately. So can I have an awareness of what's going on around me? In previous emotional intelligence webinars, I've shared this idea, and some of you might be old enough on the webinar to appreciate this. We used to have these cordless phones, right? And we would extend that big long metal antenna. We don't know if it actually did anything, but we would extend it all the way for sure, right? And we'd walk around with these big phones and our giant antennas. Think about this idea of relationship skills and awareness of others as an antenna that you're extending. Maybe it's out of your shoulder, or some say out of your heart, to say, let me sense what's happening around me, and not tune into it occasionally, but that is an open channel at all times to be aware of what's happening in the room around me. It's very easy to get too focused on what is my role in this meeting? What am I going to say? How am I going to appear competent in this meeting? What do I have to offer? What those I statements do and that I thinking does is it shuts our antenna, it closes it down, and it cuts off our awareness of what's happening around us, when in fact, as professionals and leaders, especially those who are joining us today and are taking an interest in growing as individuals, we have that opportunity to say, I'm actually not paying attention to me right now. I'm watching what's happening across this Zoom call, or across this boardroom table, or in this small office meeting of just 3 of us. How's Jane feeling? How's Jim feeling? How's Reno feeling? How do we interpret what we're seeing in both their voice, their tone, and their body language? That's extending that antenna up and saying, I'm very aware of how this room feels right now. As it says in the lower right-hand corner, I can read organizational currents accurately. We can see the tides moving within organizations. This is a high-level skill and something we'll talk about in just a minute, of how we can kind of introduce some of this. Let's jump into the importance of the daily application. So why even care about this? I've mentioned a few of these in some opening comments here, but as we think about these daily applications, there's some low-hanging fruit here, right? Improved communication by understanding another perspective, being able to say things like, I can appreciate where you're coming from, Joshua. Allow me to elaborate on what you were saying. I can appreciate what you're saying, Jane. I think there's an opportunity for us to partner here. Or maybe even more importantly, we appreciate that our emotional intelligence is keen enough to know that we don't know what's happening in a room. And we can say something like, Josh, I have to admit, I'm not understanding completely your motivations here. Can you describe to me again how this approach might help our organization? It's enough emotional intelligence not just to say, I get it. There's an even greater level of emotional intelligence to say, wait a second, I don't understand. I need more information here to appreciate the organizational tides, the organizational current in this room. Better emotional regulation, the opportunity to say, I know that I'm feeling angry, and here's what I'm going to do about it. I know that I'm feeling really, really excited and happy right now. It also isn't the best time for me to make decisions about the future of our organization, right? We want to make sure that when we're ready to make decisions, we're in steady state, that we're thinking clearly about what the road ahead is. Increase resilience, the opportunity to say, I'm ready to take on any number of challenges today, because we can rebound from setbacks very quickly by saying, I understand, I feel frustrated about that. I understand the entire floor, organization, division feels frustrated about that. But we're ready to move forward because we understand that challenges will keep coming and we can put this behind us in a healthy way. And finally, and this won't be a surprise, right? Enhanced leadership skills. The ability to inspire and motivate comes from that connection we can build with others, making decisions that are grounded in things like empathy and understanding. If we understand the organizational tides, we can say, I know that this decision isn't perfect, and I can even begin to appreciate how it's going to affect some of the people in my orbit, but I need to make it, and I will react to those circumstances as appropriate. I want to begin just jumping into some of the details of these 4 areas of emotional intelligence. And I mentioned earlier that we're going to kind of think about the 3 bears here. So easy, a bit more, and then a long-term commitment. So in self-awareness, the thing that we're after, our target for self-awareness, would be to be able to reflect on our emotions, take time to understand things like our values and goals, and of course, be mindful and appreciate our behavior and reactions. Know who we are in different situations. All of us can probably do that pretty well as we sit here. Who are you under stress? Who are you under pressure? Who are you when you're elated? Who are you when you're sitting on the beach with a margarita in hand and not a care in the world? How are those different authenticities different? How do they vary, and how do they influence things like your decision making and your judgment? Let's talk about a few of these. So an easy way to improve your self-awareness might be at any point in your morning routine. Could be during your commute, in the shower, while you brush your teeth, anything that kind of you can associate with this practice. Ask yourself, how am I feeling today? How am I going into this day? That's it. We're not saying to fix it. We're not saying change it. We're not even getting to that point of saying, oh, I'm going to create space, and I went to this webinar, and I'm going to breathe. I'm going to do 10 deep breaths, and then I'm going to do toe touches, and then I'm going to go bow to the sun. And we're not doing any of that. We're just thinking about, how do I feel today? How am I beginning this day? Am I angry? Am I frustrated? Am I happy? Am I kind of in the middle? No big deal. It can be helpful sometimes to reflect on our emotions as numbers, if that's helpful to some of you, to say, if I'm +5, I am over the moon happy. Maybe someone just threw a surprise birthday party for you, or you just found out that you're going to be a parent, or you found out that your best friend's getting married, something like that. You're over the moon, a +5. A -5 might be, you just found out you didn't get a promotion. You just found out a loved one passed away, whatever it might be. We can think about our emotions as, am I +5? Am I -5? So it might just be, how am I today? I'm a 2. That's enough. That's enough to introduce self-awareness into your daily routine. A bit more would be to ask yourself why you responded in a certain way to a situation. So a little bit of deeper reflection to actually pick something that happened in the recent past and say, what happened there? What went down? How did I react? What was driving my reaction? And what decisions do I need to make in the future to do a little better? And then finally, a grander commitment would be to create something like a daily meditation practice, or begin journaling on yourself, others, and emotions. You might start that with, what did I learn about myself today? Is a great prompt to reflect on in a journal. I realize that journaling is not for everyone. I realize that that can be a steep practice and a steep ask. So don't worry about it if that doesn't feel right today. If it feels like, Adam, you're insane, I don't have time for that. I've got kids. I'm taking care of my elderly parents. I don't have time to sit down and meditate. Notice that in the very first box here, this easy one of how am I feeling today, that's actually a 30-second meditation, right? Do it while you're brushing your teeth. Most of it, I think we're supposed to do it for 2 minutes. I do a little bit less than that some days, right? So just during that morning toothbrush, how am I feeling? Am I a 5? Am I a 4? Am I a 3? That is a 20-second meditation that you've just done. Remember when we use words like meditation or mindfulness or reflection, these don't need to be half-hour seances sitting by yourself, legs crossed Indian style. You can do that if you like, and if it speaks to you, wonderful. We can also just do it while we brush our teeth and say, how am I feeling today? Let's move on from self-awareness to think about self-management and some of the things we can do in there. Our aim in self-management to practice self-control, take responsibility for your actions, and think before you act or speak. I mentioned before that thinking path. This is the one. This is the one where we want to separate that feel and that action. Challenging moment, take a deep breath and count to 10 before responding. We ask our preschoolers to do this. I know that my daughter at her preschool, this is precisely what we ask. And can we ask ourselves to do it as an adult? Absolutely. An easy practice to count to 10 before responding. To say, I'm going to create a little space. I don't even know why yet. I'm not sure if I've experienced enough to say I can appreciate what that 10 seconds is going to do. But if I introduce it as a practice, let me experiment and think about the contrast between a split-second decision. I think I'm angry. I feel angry. I snap and I yell at my partner in business for messing up those excuse me, timesheets once again. Turns out what actually happened is your partner had to step away to take care of a family member who was ill and didn't have time to update him that day. If we had taken those 10 seconds, maybe a question shows up for us. Instead of snapping at the partner, it might be, what got in your way of doing the timesheets like you always have? It's practicing some empathy. Now, if our partner comes back and says, I have no excuse, I really did mess this up, we're not emotionally hijacked to such a point anymore where we won't be proud of what we're going to do next, which might be, okay, partner, I understand. I really do need to have these on time next week. They're very important to our accounting process, right? Versus maybe throwing accusations out, maybe throwing inappropriate language out, anything like that might come to us in our moment of weakness. A bit more in this space would be to reframe negative thoughts, ask ourselves, what would love do here? Is a wonderful prompt to consider. What would love do here? Instead of me, what would love do? Practice a delayed gratification exercise is a long-term commitment in self-management. Instead of giving into immediate impulse, can I delay gratification and focus on long-term goals? So all of us have probably heard about the children's marshmallow experiment, right? Where we put a child in a room with one marshmallow. And we say, you can choose to eat that now, but if you're willing to wait just 5 more minutes, I'll come in and give you 2 more marshmallows. And inevitably, as children, we always eat that first marshmallow. But as adults, can we become more attuned to delaying gratification and saying, I'm so in control here and can manage my emotions to say, let me take a beat here. I'm going to delay this gratification and see if I can get a better long-term result. Relationship skills. Our goal here is to build rapport and communicate effectively, to be able to resolve conflicts. A very simple way to help build our relationship skills is to introduce open-ended questions instead of closed questions, and I'll make that distinction in a minute, in our conversations. Open questions begin with what and how. They open up our audience to answering more than we would get with a closed question. Is that what you're going to do next? Is a closed question. Is, does, are you, all have to be answered with yes or no. An open question like what or how does not need to be answered with a yes or no. It allows someone the opportunity to explain their thinking. We want to do that for our relationships, right? We want to do that to collaborate effectively. There's no question as leaders, especially for those of you on the call who are in a leadership role, that we sometimes need to ask closed questions. But in this space, we want to say, can you possibly use an open question to give our respondent more space? So instead of, is that the approach you're going to take? It's, what do you like about this approach? How do you think this approach will resonate with our customers? What do you think might be next if we try this approach? Those questions give people more room to come to us instead of pushing them away from us. A bit more in here would be avoid assigning blame and think about how might we. A commitment in the space would sound like building a rapport with others and finding common solutions. Yeah, absolutely. A wonderful question that I'll answer in real time. Should the 10-second rule be applied to positive reactions? If you'd like it to, for sure. And in fact, what a wonderful experiment that could be, to see if you can sort of bask in that positive emotion by yourself, to kind of let it percolate and experience it fully before reacting to it. That would be a wonderful experiment. So absolutely, I'd consider that, just to see what it feels like. And if it works for you, if it's fun, a great way to enjoy a strong moment. Maybe you've been promoted, or you finally got a job you've been applying for a long time. Just to bask in that moment and say, look at what I've done here. To self-assess and self-manage, to say, allow me to enjoy this space just by myself for 10 seconds. A longer term commitment in the the relationship skill space would be to build rapport with others by doing things like building common grounds, showing authentic interest in their lives and a curiosity, remembering that everyone is an adventure, and getting to know them is not a challenge for you as much as it is an opportunity for you to appreciate who you're surrounded by. Our aim in awareness for others, now we're in that final quadrant, is to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Words like empathy and sympathy come up here. We listen actively and validate their feelings. The easy breezy in this scenario is to reflect what one is saying, to show that you are listening, right? This is that listening actively skill. It sounds like what you're saying is this approach will hurt our organization because it cuts out a key stakeholder. Did I hear that right? That might be what it sounds like. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated about this approach, Mark. What else can we do here to bring you back in to our team? And notice that open question that I used at the end of there. What can we do to bring you back into our team? That's a distinction from, is that what you would want, Mark? Let's give Mark opportunity to share more about how he wants to be brought into the team. A bit more in awareness to others is to visualize how you would feel if you were in their situation. Take a moment to visualize. You might have to bring this on first as a very intentional practice, but then we can step away later and do it more quickly. Or I should say, in the future, as you get better at it, you can more quickly execute on that. Instead of interrupting or formulating a response, this is a bigger leap in this space. We can try to really listen and honor their perspective. It's called level 3 listening. Level 1 is where we just listen and respond. Level 2 is where we say, I think there's an opportunity for us to connect here, but you're still focused on yourself. Level 3 is when we say, I'm really here just to hear you, just to be curious about you. I'm not going to interrupt. I'm not going to be formulating my response. I'm going to sit and be with you and listen and honor your perspective. It's when we change in our mindset from being in a conversation to being in service to a conversation. A longer term commitment and something a bit more challenging in this space. A couple final thoughts here before we switch to questions in just 2 minutes. EQ is a skill that can be developed. We talked about that earlier. Some of the things we've talked about today will improve your emotional intelligence, even if you just do one of those small things. I'm going to use open questions after today's conversation. I might begin listening just a little bit harder. I might consider taking 10 seconds after I get upset. EQ requires ongoing effort. Like any other skill, it can be lost. It reminds me a lot of all those German lessons I took in high school, right? And then I didn't get to use them anymore, and now I've down to like 3 or 4 words of German. Used to be able to speak full sentences, and now I'm, Gesundheit is like the end of the road for me with German. So we need to keep using this skill to make sure that it comes out. Remember that EQ is a journey, not a destination. None of us on this call can say, my EQ is high enough, I'm done, I'm finished. Developing our EQ is a lifelong journey. It's something we'll stay committed to, and be patient with yourself as you go through this process. I teach this on a near weekly basis. I'm talking about emotional intelligence to different groups, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes 101, sometimes 1,000-to-1. And in this instance, we have to remind ourselves that we won't always be perfect. I've been less than perfect emotionally from emotional intelligence perspective, I assure you, in the last 24 hours. but recognizing that we were imperfect, recognizing there's an opportunity to be better is part of that emotional intelligence to say, I'm self-aware enough to know that I could have exercised better relationship awareness and better self-management yesterday during that meeting. Let me see if I can do better next time. I wanted to share a couple references for further selection. I've highlighted 2 in yellow in that bottom row that I really want to bring your attention to if this topic is of interest. The one on the far left is the original book on emotional intelligence, again by Dr. Daniel Goleman. Daniel developed this idea of emotional intelligence in the mid-90s. He formalized it with that first book on emotional intelligence. It is as relevant today as it was 30 years ago. Can't encourage you enough to read it. The second thing I'll offer is Emotional Intelligence 2.0. This is what I call an airport assessment, because you can usually find that book in those airport kiosks, like the Hudson books that we've all seen in airports. They're usually floating around in there. So they're very inexpensive, only about 14, 15 bucks, something like that. And yeah, so just to answer your question, how can we take a measure of EQ? This is it. The EQ 2.0 is the simplest way to do it. And the reason I like this assessment is that you can self-debrief it. You can take the assessment and it will walk you through your results and talk about how did your assessment come back? What does it mean? And then most importantly, what are some things I can do to improve it? And you can do that all yourself without hiring an expert coach, without hiring an expert assessment giver. There are ways to grow your EQ in very sort of local, practical, inexpensive ways. So those are the 2 references I would put in this space. Thanks for the questions as we went through there. I'm happy to take more as I watch the Q&A box, and look forward to those for the next 5 or 6 minutes or so before we wrap up.
Well, that was great, Adam. Yeah, no questions. I know you answered a few. I have a question while we wait for some more to trickle in.
Sure.
There's that old saying, you talk a lot about doing things daily, like the check-in, pausing and taking that 10-second break. There's that old saying, it takes 10,000 hours to become a master of, playing the guitar or the piano or whatever. Is there a sort of one of those generalized lengths of time that's sort of in our colloquialisms that say, like, to do something, to make something a daily habit, to make it part of your routine? Is it a month? Is it 2 months, 6 months? I know that's going to vary per person, but
yeah, that's a good question.
Number floating out there?
I don't know if there is. I haven't heard of a number like that for emotional intelligence. It also reminds me that I'm a terrible guitar player, as you said that. But I do have to, I don't know if there's a number. What I would say is that the clients I've worked with that have had the greatest success, where they, let's say 6 or 12 months later, they say, I am without question more emotionally intelligent now, either by their own self-assessment or by taking the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 assessment, where they are literally smarter, to put it that way. They have developed further down their EQ spectrum, are those who think simple first, meaning we don't make some commitment today. Starting tonight, I will journal for 30 minutes and every morning I will meditate. It's unsustainable. It's no different than saying, well, I want to get in really good shape, and starting tonight, I'm going to go to the gym for every 2 hours. Because all of us know that it'll never stick, right? And so the smaller the addition to our emotional intelligence practice spectrum, the more likely it is to stick. It's why I think about things like, while I'm brushing my teeth in the morning, how am I feeling, right? What am I feeling like today? Am I a 2? Am I a 4? Am I a 1? And that can be it. That can be your whole additional practice for the entire day that can change your level of self-awareness. Because my guess is that for most of us on the webinar, we don't even have that much of a practice right now. How many of you in the last 24 hours have asked yourself, how am I feeling and why am I feeling the way I am? Not many of us, because there's a lot of attention. There's a lot of things vying for our attention. Our email, our Teams, Slack, Twitter, social media in general are all vying for our attention. So The smaller thing you can introduce, the more likely it is to stick. And the opportunity we have there can be very gentle to just say, all I'm going to ask of myself is while I'm brushing my teeth or while I'm combing my hair or while I'm driving to work, I say, how am I feeling today? And that can be enough. I hope that's helpful, Scott. I don't have a specific number, but what I would offer is that the smaller the thing we commit to, the more likely it is we can begin down a path of greater emotional intelligence.
No, I like that. I think making the smaller adjustment will help it stick.
Jose had a wonderful question. Can I jump to that one, Scott?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jose had a wonderful question, Jose. I mean, this is like, oh, I love that you're thinking this way, because the specific example I'll give about how EQ can help team leadership is the fact that we've got that cordless phone antenna up, and we can appreciate what everyone on our team is bringing to the table, their strengths, their weaknesses, how they're feeling that day, what they need that day from their leader. Instead of what can I get from them, our EQ begins to tell us, what can I offer this employee? If Scott was on my team and I'm noticing that maybe he's not working that quickly that day and he seems to be struggling more than normal with some of the reports that he typically develops, the question from me as an emotionally intelligent leader is, Scott, how are you? What's happening for you today? How can I be in service to you as a leader? And notice how I'm using those open questions, right? My antenna was up. I sensed there was something different going on with Scott, and I'm using open questions to say, tell me more about what's happening. I'm authentically curious about the change I sense in Scott's emotions and his energy that he's working with that day. So I hope that's helpful, Jose. It is potentially the most important thing you can do, far exceeding, in my opinion, any level of intellectual intelligence you can offer a team, is the emotional intelligence that you can offer your team. So good luck, Jose.
Awesome. That's a great answer as well. I think a lot of people in leadership roles will find that answer helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Michael, there will be the slides and the recording will be sent out. You'll get that in email today. I think, Adam, I think that brings us to a close. Thank you again for being here today. Your great presentation as usual.
Very
a lot
well.
of great insight I think you shared with everyone today. Before we wrap up, just a quick programming note on our upcoming schedule. We have about 3 webinars coming up over the next 3-ish weeks. Our next one is on May 30th at 10 a.m. Eastern. That's the Functional Safety Standards Committee recently published an article. We'll have all 5 authors on for a presentation going over their results and perspectives and what's next. The next webinar on June 8th is from this series, the Build Your Career series. That will be on public speaking on June 8th at 11 a.m. And then on June 11th, we will have another the Interfacing Cyber and Physical World Standards Group will be presenting what's going on in their space. You'll be able to register for all these webinars and some of our and access recordings for some of our recent webinars that are on demand with the link you'll receive in tomorrow's email with the slides and the recording. Again, thank you all for attending and your great participation. Adam, thank you as always. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Scott. See you again soon.
Sounds good.